You don't even have a job. What makes you think you deserve to keep him? That's what he said, the man she once trusted enough to marry. And he said it in court in front of their son. But Delaney didn't flinch, because tucked deep inside a rotting cabin in the Blue Ridge Woods was something that could burn down everything he thought he controlled. And she was done being afraid. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The office smelled like overbrewed coffee and damp carpet. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Delaney sat stiffly on the cracked vinyl bench, legs crossed trying not to bounce her foot. Rain streaked the windows in thin gray lines. Beside her, Micah leaned against her arm, asleep, his chin tucked toward his collar. His sketchbook drooped from one small hand, fingers still curled like he hadn't quite finished the last line. The receptionist tapped her nails against the desk, scrolling through something on her screen. The waiting room had been quiet for the past hour, aside from the occasional sigh or the rustle of someone shifting in a seat. Delaney glanced at the wall clock, 2:48. She'd been there since a little past 1. Her phone buzzed. One missed call. Andrew Rowe. She didn't need to open the voicemail. The subject line on the email that followed said enough motion to reevaluate custody. Petitioner Andrew Rowe. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she locked the phone without listening. Micah shifted in his sleep, his sketchbook slipping onto the bench. She picked it up and flipped through the pages without really thinking. Houses again. Row after row of neat little homes with sunbeams and porch swings and tidy yards. No people. Just outlines of safety. They called her name at 3:11 and she stood nudging Micah gently. He blinked confused, then reached for her hand. By 4:00, they were back on the sidewalk, soaked from the knees down. Delaney's boots squelched with each step. She carried the folder under her coat, though the contents weren't worth protecting anymore. The office had told her she'd need proof of income, of a stable home of some plan. Everything she didn't have. Their apartment was just off a side street behind an auto parts store. 3rd floor, no elevator. She keyed in her fingers and numb. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and cheap detergent. One bulb flickered in the hallway. The baseboard heater hadn't worked since March. Micah went straight to the kitchen table, picked up his pencils, and opened a new page. No complaints. No questions. He drew the way some kids prayed. Delaney peeled off her coat and hung it by the door. The wall behind it was cracked from water damage, the paint peeling upward like sunburnt skin. She opened the fridge. Half a gallon of milk, some bread, an apple gone soft at one side. Her email showed no new replies. 2 job applications still unread. She refreshed again. Nothing. She opened her wallet. $48 and a single-use bus pass. Outside sirens cut through the fading light somewhere close. She pulled the curtain aside, then let it fall. Her eye caught the mailbox key on the counter. She hesitated, then went downstairs. Among the coupons and unpaid bills was a glossy flyer tucked between folded menus. County seized property auction. This Saturday starting bids $100. $500 abandoned rural properties. No minimum income required. She held it blinking. Probably a scam, or some trap to lure in desperate people like her. Back upstairs, Micah was still drawing, shoulders hunched. She didn't speak, only sat across from him, watching as he sketched a small square cabin with a pitched roof and a swing hanging from the porch beam before sliding the page toward her in silence. The sirens passed close, a high splitting wail that made the window panes shudder. Their echo still hummed in her ears when the alarm rattled against the nightstand. She pulled on her jeans, the fabric still stiff from the damp air, while Micah balanced at the sink toothbrush, foaming at his lips. The faucet dripped, the mirror flaked at one corner, dividing his reflection into 2 versions, one sharp, the other ghosted at the edges. She zipped his jacket, smoothing the collar where it had folded under. He looked up, his face still puffy from sleep, and she kissed his forehead before grabbing the keys. The school drop-off line moved slow and silent, the air between parents like a truce nobody wanted to break. A woman in a newer car gave her a tight nod. Delaney returned it out of habit. Then she drove. The courthouse was already half full by the time she reached the 2nd floor. A stack of clipboards sat on a folding table out front. She signed her name, barely legible through the chill in her fingers, and picked up a bidder's card with the number 43. Inside, the room pressed close, warm, with the breath of too many people and not enough space. The plaster walls curled at the corners and ceiling fans labored overhead, too sluggish to spin faster. A man in khakis and a courthouse badge tapped the microphone, then began. Parcel after parcel flew by. Numbers, lot sizes, water access, utility status. Hands rose, offers fired back and forth. She lost track of how many people had nodded knowingly at terms she didn't understand. Then Lot 32, the man read. Blue Ridge Township. Single standing structure. Known locally as the Blackwood Cabin. Delaney's ears sharpened. No active utilities. No structural inspection. Abandoned. Last recorded resident, Thaddeus Blackwood. Deceased presumed missing, 1989. A murmur rippled. Someone 3 rows back scoffed. Jesus! That thing again. Another voice, older and drier, barely above a whisper. Nobody touches that one. It's cursed. No hands went up. Delaney glanced down at her card. The number seemed ridiculous now, but her hand lifted before she could stop it. Bidder, 43. $100, the man said, almost in disbelief. Any counterbid, silence. Going once, twice, sold. A single crack of the gavel made her flinch. People turned curious, then looked away. Nobody congratulated her. Nobody smiled. She lingered after the room cleared, tucking her paperwork into her coat pocket. Her stomach tightened, not from excitement, more like falling. Like she'd stepped forward onto something that wasn't actually there. A woman brushed past her shoulder, then doubled back. Excuse me, she said. Her voice was soft but pressed. She looked to be in her late 60s, hair in a long gray braid. You bought the Blackwood place, Delaney nodded slowly. Yes. The woman's eyes dropped to the paperwork in her hands. You've got children, just one. The woman paused, inhaled like she wanted to say more, but had learned better. Make sure you check the roof. There's something up there. Folks always said he built it strange, and he was the kind of man who didn't like company. Before Delaney could ask anything, the woman walked off without another word. She picked Micah up from school with a strange stillness in her limbs. He climbed into the back seat, slinging his backpack beside him. When she told him they were going to see their house, he didn't say a word. Just blinked slowly and looked out the window. The road to Blue Ridge narrowed after the gas station. Paved lines turned to gravel, then gravel turned to dirt. The GPS lost its signal halfway through, and her phone screen showed only a spinning compass. They passed 2 broken fences, a rusted mailbox with no door, and a sign so weathered it looked like bark. A path veered right, barely wide enough for the car. She turned in anyway, wheels bumping over root and stone. Then the trees thinned and the cabin appeared. It was smaller than she expected. The wood siding, gray with age, had curled back in places like dried leaves. Ivy had climbed across one wall, looping up to the roofline, where part of the gutter sagged like a loose stitch. Delaney killed the engine and opened the door. The silence outside pressed hard, deeper than just quiet. It felt vacated. Micah followed close behind, dragging his sneakers through the leaves. She stepped up onto the porch boards, creaking under her weight. The front door stood ajar. When she touched it, the hinge let out a long screech like something that hadn't moved in decades. Inside smelled like old paper and damp wood. A narrow shaft of light cut across the room, illuminating motes of dust, and a wall plaque above the doorway. Blackwood, 1962. She turned to speak to Micah, but he wasn't beside her. He was crouched near the floor, palms flat, peering between 2 warped planks. His face hovered inches above the board's eyes, locked on something tucked below. Don't touch it, she said, more from instinct than fear. Micah didn't move. The light from the door hit just right, and she caught the edge of something nestled in the dark space metal, dull with age but still reflecting back the sun like it had been waiting. Delaney dropped to her knees, slid her fingers into the gap, and tugged until the floor groaned. The box was heavier than it looked. She pried it free, the rusted edges scraping against the warped planks. Cold metal pressed into her palms as the lid gave with a low groan and a scatter of debris. Inside, layered between scraps of cloth and yellowed paper, were a collection of hand-drawn schematics. Coils, spirals, intersecting lines she couldn't begin to name. Below those, a spiral-bound notebook, its cover cracked and curling like dried bark. She flipped it open. The handwriting shifted from rigid print to wild cursive across different pages like it belonged to more than one person or one man over the course of slow unraveling. Micah stood beside her, clutching the sketchbook against his chest. eyes fixed on the pages. "What's a resonance amplifier?" he asked. She blinked. Her finger had landed on a heading scrawled in red ink. Below it, diagrams, voltage readings, strange notations. Other phrases stood out, circled multiple times: field collapse thresholds, self-sustaining feedback loop, and written twice in ink so dark it bled through the page containment risk. Delaney closed the notebook carefully. "It's just science talk," she said, too soft to convince either of them. Was he a scientist? She glanced at Micah's face, so serious for 7. Maybe, she said, or maybe just someone who liked building weird things. But something inside her couldn't let it go. The sketches didn't look like the work of a hobbyist. They had symmetry, weight, language. Later that evening, after dropping Micah off with her downstairs neighbor, she drove across town to an old service lot tucked behind a strip mall where Frankie worked second shift at an equipment repair warehouse. The place smelled like oil, old metal, and microwave popcorn from the break room. Frankie spotted her through the wire-reinforced window and waved her in, wiping her hands on a rag. "Delaney Rowe. I haven't seen you since—" "What's your wedding?" Delaney tried to smile, holding up the folder. "I found something. I need your brain." Frankie raised an eyebrow but motioned her to follow. They sat at a dented workbench beneath a hanging light. Delaney laid the notebook open across the table, smoothing the pages so they wouldn't curl. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Frankie leaned in, tracing one of the diagrams with the edge of her knuckle. "This isn't just tinkering," she said. "Whoever drew this was working on an energy resonance design. That's big league stuff." Delaney kept quiet. Frankie flipped another page, then another, her frown deepening. "This kind of setup, it's what some fringe physicists were chasing in the 80s. Self-generating energy systems. But it was shut down. Too unstable. Too expensive. Or too close to something no one wanted on the grid." Delaney felt the question rise in her throat before she could stop it. "Ever hear of Thaddeus Blackwood?" The room went still. Frankie's fingers froze on the page. "You're not serious." Delaney stared at her. Frankie slowly pulled her hands back, folding them. "I heard that name when I interned at the Federal Technical Archives in Raleigh," Frankie said. "Old files, stuff nobody was supposed to touch. He was flagged for security review, some kind of undisclosed incident, then gone." Delaney opened her mouth to ask what kind of incident, but her phone buzzed. New email. Subject: custody evaluation notice. Legal counsel for Andrew Rowe. She scanned the lines. "As part of the renewed custody petition, a review of the child's current living situation is now required. Unless improvements can be demonstrated, full guardianship may be reconsidered." Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered the phone. Frankie noticed but didn't ask. Instead, she reached out, gently tapping one of the diagrams. "You know this thing might be valuable, right? Or dangerous? Or both?" "I don't care," Delaney said, voice flat. "I just need to keep my son." Frankie's eyes softened. "Then we'll start with what this thing actually does." She gathered the notebook, flipping it shut. "Let me run a few scans. I'll call you tomorrow." Outside, the night had deepened. Streetlights buzzed in the fog. Delaney sat behind the wheel of the borrowed sedan, the heat wheezing from the vents, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel. Thoughts circled Micah asleep in a stranger's apartment. The word containment scrawled in smeared ink, a house that had waited 30 years for someone to open it. What unsettled her more, she couldn't say the thing hidden beneath the floorboards or the fear of losing it. Her grip on the wheel tightened. By morning, she was back on the gravel road, the notebook on the seat beside her. Frankie's boots landed heavy on the warped planks as she crossed the threshold first. The air inside clung with its usual staleness, old pine, and something faintly metallic. Delaney followed the notebook, biting into her palm, while Micah lingered close behind, eyes scanning the shadows as if something might stir there. Micah trailed them, both silent, his eyes shifting around the room as if he were tracking something no one else could see. Frankie knelt in the center of the living room, pulled a handheld EMF reader from her canvas bag, and flicked it on. The screen blinked, green then yellow. She turned slowly in place, then stopped. "Here," she murmured, tapping the worn plank beneath her boot. "There's a reading spike just under this section." Delaney crouched beside her, brushing away the dust that had settled in the seams of the floor. A few boards looked newer, as if someone had hastily replaced part of them without bothering to match the wood. Frankie pulled a crowbar from her pack. It took 3 tries and the better part of 10 minutes, but finally the boards gave. Beneath them was a recessed square, metal-lined with several old bolts still sticking out like teeth. The edges had scorch marks, and a patch of copper wiring snaked into the darkness, severed and curled like a burned-out fuse. "What is that?" Delaney whispered. Frankie didn't answer at first. She reached in, running her fingers along the lip of the pit. This was built to hold something. Fixed. Heavy. And not store-bought either. Look at those mounts. Like a generator, Frankie shook her head. Too precise. This isn't home improvement. It's lab-level work. Military, maybe. Or something he built himself. Delaney lowered her voice. But for what, Frankie exhaled through her nose, then sat back on her heels. I don't know. But if it ran at all, it was generating energy, or bending it. These traces... She held up the reader again. The field around here, it's not natural. A chill crept into Delaney's arms despite her jacket. She looked around the room suddenly, hyper-aware of the way the walls seemed to lean inward, like they were listening. That night, the wind picked up around 1 a.m. Delaney stirred in the cot, blinking at the sliver of moonlight bleeding through the curtains. The heater they'd hauled in whirred softly beside her, its hum comforting in the otherwise quiet space. Then Micah sat up. "Mom," he whispered, his voice pinched. "There's someone outside." Delaney froze, heart kicking up. "Did you hear something?" He nodded wide-eyed. Footsteps on the leaves. The blanket slid off as she rose barefoot and crossed to the window. Darkness pressed tight against the glass, the woods crowding close on every side. Nothing moved. Her hand closed around the flashlight. She crept toward the back door, which hung slightly ajar, swaying just enough to whisper against the frame. Cold air slapped her lungs the moment she stepped out. The beam cut across the yard's stillness everywhere, no trace of prints in the thick scatter of leaves. But in the morning when she stepped outside again, the answer was there. Just beyond the bend in the drive, where the mud ran deeper, a tire rut veered sharply off the track. The front wheel had sunken deep, as if the driver had stopped, waited, then reversed out with some effort. The print was fresh edges, still wet, the soil pulled and broken. Delaney crouched down, fingers hovering above the pattern. Her mind raced ahead of her body. Inside, Micah was quiet over breakfast. He kept glancing toward the windows and once flinched when a squirrel landed on the porch roof. She picked up her phone and stepped out again to call Frankie. Her voice came through sharp with wind behind it. "Did you tell anyone what you found? Or that you were helping me?" Frankie hesitated. "Frankie. I didn't name you. I used my work laptop to run the scans. The architecture software there? It's more powerful." Delaney closed her eyes. "That laptop's connected to a company server, right?" "Yeah," Frankie said slowly. "But it's just me. Nobody's watching, Frankie." A pause. "Okay," she admitted. "The server runs real-time syncs. If someone flagged that schematic, they could trace it. Maybe." Delaney stared out at the woods beyond the cabin, the trees standing too still in the morning haze. Behind her, Micah tapped on the glass, pointing at the edge of the forest. Something small had moved, then vanished between the trees. When she finally turned back toward the porch, something else was waiting there that hadn't been a moment ago. The package lay on the porch like it had grown there overnight. No postmark, no return address, just a plain manila envelope, resting neatly between the boards, too clean for the dust and frost that clung to everything else. Delaney stepped around it 3 times before finally picking it up. Inside, a single sheet of heavy cardstock, folded once, and a photocopy. The letterhead was corporate, printed in stark serif fonts with wide margins. "To whom it may concern. It has come to our attention that you may be in unauthorized possession of technical materials originating from a decommissioned federal partnership project, referendum E04AE Alty Blackwood. These materials, whether conceptual or physical, remain classified under dormant NDA terms established in 1990 under joint review by Argonne Energy in the Department of Energy. Any continued use, reproduction, or distribution of said content constitutes a violation of federal intellectual property law and may be subject to legal consequence. Please be advised that these notices are preliminary. Further action may be pursued as necessary." The signature below the printed name, Victor Lawton, Executive Director, Argonne Energy R&D, was not handwritten. But even the copy of it felt deliberate, like someone had chosen to send a ghost of a threat rather than the real thing. Delaney held the paper by its corners, trying not to let her hands shake. Googling wasn't necessary. The company's name had floated around enough, one of the largest private sector contractors for green energy systems, with a long trail of litigation behind it. Lawton himself had appeared in a glossy business magazine years earlier, a man with a polite smile and dead eyes. The second page was a blurry photocopy. The ink bled in places, but a few lines remained clear. Project E04 AE Alt Blackwood suspended. May 1990, lead supervisor V. Lawton. Containment review. Pending. Delaney read those words twice, then folded everything back into the envelope and slid it into the drawer beside the sink, just as the phone buzzed. Frankie's name lit up the screen. "I need to tell you something, and I need you not to panic," her friend said without preamble. Delaney didn't breathe. "They suspended me, effective immediately. What my manager called me in told me 8 flagged unauthorized access to archive files. The energy architecture scans I ran. They weren't on our approved list of open source tech. Someone watched what I opened, traced it back." Delaney's mouth was dry. "Did they say anything about me?" "No, not directly, but they knew it was related to something off-grid. And they mentioned Blackwood. That name hasn't crossed anyone's lips in 30 years, Laney." A long silence followed. Delaney gripped the phone tighter. "I'm sorry," Frankie added, quieter now. "I thought I was being careful." "You were." "I wasn't." Delaney hung up a few minutes later without knowing how the call ended. The sky outside was pale gray light trying to push through fog that had settled around the trees like a second skin. She stood still in the center of the kitchen, barely aware of Micah watching her from the hallway. He had his drawing pad tucked under one arm. When she turned toward him, his expression didn't change, just those wide, too wise eyes following her. "I think I need to sell it," she said almost to herself. "I think we need to get out of here." Micah didn't move. Then softly, "If we don't keep it, they'll take everything." She blinked. "What?" He shrugged, still not looking away. "They already tried to take me, right?" "What's one more thing?" Delaney felt something inside her give way. Not like a snap, but like fabric unraveling one thread at a time. She dropped to the floor beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, burying her face in his hoodie. Micah didn't ask why she was crying. She didn't explain because she didn't know how to. The tears came without sound, slow at first, then faster, until her chest ached from holding them in too long. She had no plan, no fallback. The law was watching her. The company was watching her. Even the woods outside seemed to be waiting. But Micah, her son, sat quietly in her arms like something solid, something small but stubborn. When he finally spoke, his voice was muffled. "We can fix the roof, right?" She nodded, even if she didn't believe it. Outside, wind scratched along the cabin's siding. Somewhere behind the trees, a bird let out a broken, spiraling call. Delaney glanced toward the window, and for half a second thought she saw movement, just a shift in light, or maybe something more deliberate. She didn't get up to check. She lay awake until the gray of morning began to seep through the curtains. By the time she set the bowls to dry on the counter, the rain had eased, leaving the air damp and heavy. Outside, Micah crouched on the back porch with a metal spoon chipping moss off the edge of a flat stone that jutted awkwardly from the path. The steady clink of metal against rock carried through the walls, rhythmic, almost soothing, until it stopped. Delaney was inside drying bowls on the warped kitchen counter, listening to the steady clink of metal against rock. It was rhythmic, comforting, almost until it stopped. "Mom," Micah called out. "This one moves." She stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her jeans. Micah had managed to loosen the largest stone at the edge of the step, and now he stood beside it, pointing. It had shifted a few inches to the left, revealing a dark recess beneath. Delaney dropped to her knees. Together they lifted the slab just enough to pull free the object underneath. A small steel container latched on one side and sealed tight. It bore no markings, but its weight suggested something more than forgotten tools or animal bones. Inside a VHS tape, its label faded into near blankness, and a thick legal folder wrapped in a waterproof sleeve. Micah stared at the tape. "Can we watch it?" Delaney hesitated. "We need to take it to Frankie." An hour later, they gathered around Frankie's old combo TV VCR unit in her basement workshop. Dust coated the machine like a layer of skin. Frankie adjusted the tracking knob as the tape whirred. The screen jittered and then settled. Grainy footage. A static shot of a man sitting stiff-backed behind a desk. Shadows warped the corners of the room, but the face in the center was unmistakable. Thaddeus Blackwood. If you're watching this, he began, his voice low but steady. I may have failed to protect what I built. Delaney leaned forward. They told me to stop, he continued. They revoked my license, shut down the lab, and then they offered money partnership contracts, non-disclosure deals. The agency wasn't working alone. They had help, corporate, private sector interests. He shifted, looking off camera. His hands were clenched on the table. I wouldn't sign. I wouldn't sell it. They tried pressure, then threats, surveillance. They tore apart my workshop, claimed it was unsafe, that I was unstable. The image glitched for a moment, then resumed. I buried everything. The files, the blueprints. They won't find it all. And if they do, maybe this tape survives. Maybe someone listens. The screen crackled into black. Delaney sat frozen. Frankie didn't move either. Then slowly, Frankie reached into the waterproof folder and pulled out the first sheet. A draft contract unsigned bearing the letterhead of the Department of Energy and the Argonne Energy logo side by side. Below it, letters between Thaddeus and a law office in Asheville discussing intellectual property rights and whistleblower protections. And at the bottom, a faded copy of a patent submission stamped pending, no review. Frankie looked up, mouth slightly open. Laney, this is enough to burn down a building. Delaney didn't answer. Her fingers skimmed the edge of the paper, barely grazing the signature line. If this went public, Frankie continued, it wouldn't just ruin Argonne. It could unearth everything: misconduct, suppressed tech, maybe even people who, I don't know if I want that. Delaney cut in voice brittle. Micah, who had been silent the entire time, finally looked up from the tape case in his lap. If we show it to someone, he said, will they take me away? Delaney turned toward him, startled. No, she said quickly. Too quickly. Micah didn't flinch. You don't know that. Frankie shifted, uncomfortable. Delaney, I'm not saying throw this online, but this is leverage, real leverage. Delaney stood up, pacing the narrow room. Her heart pounded, fingers tingling. She had come here just to survive, to find a place no one wanted, fix it up, and give Micah a roof over his head. Not this. Not secret tapes and surveillance and government ghosts knocking on old doors. But her hands didn't let go of the folder. Even as her arms dropped to her sides, even as her mind spun through every way this could go wrong, she held it tighter. Frankie watched her carefully. You're not the first person they tried to erase. Delaney didn't speak. Behind her, Micah reached up, tugged lightly at her sleeve. She turned, met his eyes. Outside, the wind kicked up again. The workshop's lone window rattled softly in its frame, the sound echoing long after they left for the cabin that night. The first sound was faint, a tap against the window above the sink. Delaney froze in the cot, unsure if the heavy dark had tricked her. Then it came again, sharper, deliberate. Breath caught in her throat. Micah stirred beside her, murmuring something incoherent before sinking back into sleep. The blanket slid from her lap as she rose, padding across the cold floor. Fingers found the flashlight but didn't flick it on. By the window she lingered, eyes straining. Fog clung thick to the glass like a veil. No shadows. No outline of a face. Only her reflection, startled, drawn hands trembling on the sill. Lights stayed off. At the back of the cabin, the storage compartment gave way with a muted scrape. The steel box remained, but the lock hung, snapped lid, crooked. Inside, the VHS tape and folder had been disturbed, examined but left behind. Not theft, a warning. Eddie, the backup copy hidden beneath the pantry floorboard, was slipped quickly into Micah's toy chest. Her pulse thundered, rising even higher when the front door groaned open on its hinges. Flashlight swung up, nothing but wind. Only wind. By sunrise, the fog had lifted, but Delaney hadn't closed her eyes. She sat at the table, gripping her coffee so tightly the ceramic handle threatened to snap. Micah arrived home from school later that day, uncharacteristically quiet. He set his backpack down with unusual care. Delaney looked up from the sink. Everything okay? He nodded, then shook his head. There was a man at the gate today. Her stomach dropped. What kind of man? He wore a suit. He didn't go inside, just waited by the fence. Then he asked if I lived here, if this was still Blackwood's place. She knelt beside him, cupping his face. Did he touch you? No. Did he follow you? No. He hesitated. He smiled, but it didn't feel like a nice smile. Delaney stood nearly knocking over the coffee mug. Her hands fumbled as she reached for her phone. The woman at the county office had a voice like wet gravel. Yes, Miss Rowe, we've received notice. A request for an emergency home evaluation has been filed. Your son's school reported recent behavioral changes, a drop in attention, fearful behavior. You'll need to be available for a home inspection no later than this Friday. Wait, Delaney said, gripping the edge of the counter. Who filed the request? I can't disclose that, ma'am. Was it his father? A pause. I can't say. The line went dead before she could push further. She dialed the sheriff's office next, told them about the break-in, the man outside the window, the disturbed lock, the child being approached. The deputy yawned halfway through her account. Cabin's out past the utility line, ma'am. We don't run regular patrols that far. Closest unit's a county and a half away. You didn't see a license plate, you didn't get a name. Not much we can do. Delaney's voice cracked. So you're saying, unless I'm bleeding, you don't care? Not saying that, he replied. Just saying the budget says so. The call ended with a dull click. Later, Frankie showed up with her sleeves rolled and a bottle of cheap wine tucked under one arm. She glanced at the bent window latch, the splintered lock, the too quiet kitchen. They're not trying to scare you, she said, sitting across from Delaney. Not directly. They're just making you feel like no one's watching. No one's coming. That's how they win. Delaney gave a bitter laugh. That's how they've always won. Frankie refilled both glasses without asking. That night after Micah was asleep, Delaney sat at the tiny kitchen table and pulled out a yellow legal pad. She started writing. A list, maybe. A letter. She didn't know which. Something like a goodbye, but not quite. Her handwriting was uneven. Words scratched into the page, then crossed out. She tried to write what mattered. Why she came here. What it had meant, even if it fell apart. But the page stayed unfinished, her pen hovering, when the thought of the flash drive pulled her upright. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat on Frankie's old laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard while Delaney stood behind, arms crossed, tightly clutching the hem of her sleeve like a lifeline. The flash drive from the cabin clicked into place. A moment of silence. Then a new folder appeared, blankly labeled Miss Docs. Frankie clicked. Inside files poured down the screen, mostly engineering logs, raw data, dense schematics. Then one near the bottom caught her eye. Last, filed. No extension, Frankie murmured, brow tightening. Weird naming convention. She opened a terminal window and started typing commands. Delaney couldn't follow half of it. Numbers, symbols, windows, opening and collapsing like falling dominoes. It's encrypted, Frankie said, glancing back. But the cipher isn't military grade. Feels like something he built himself. Time crawled. 46 minutes later, a progress bar appeared. The screen turned black. White letters surfaced, slightly jittering, as though typed by a hand that couldn't quite stay steady. Statement of record. Thaddeus C. Blackwood, filed unregistered. ID reference. Fed code 1418A3A, Frankie scrolled. Paragraph after paragraph of formal dated language. But beneath the legal phrasing, it bled. This submission serves as notice of non-compliance with Project Halcyon's revised terms. I, Thaddeus C. Blackwood, refuse further participation in any joint development efforts involving Argon Energy or affiliated federal agencies. Their intent is to suppress and commercialize resonance-based technology, not for stability, but for extraction and control. I will not be a part of it. Frankie's voice dropped. Halcyon Jesus. That's not public domain. Delaney pointed to the timestamp on the file. December 2nd, 1989. That's 2 weeks before he vanished. Another folder unlocked. Inside a single .mp4 file. They didn't speak as it loaded. Grainy footage appeared. Thaddeus again, but this time older, more gaunt. His eyes were sunken, voice raw but steady. If you're seeing this, I didn't make it. Or I did, but not as myself anymore. They knew I wouldn't give it up, so they tried silence. They'll bury this like they buried the last 3 whistleblowers. Maybe worse. He took a slow breath. A shiver ran down Delaney's back. He looked directly into the lens, not pleading, not afraid, just resolute. But systems fail, people break, and the truth, if recorded properly, leaks. I'm not a martyr. I'm a conduit. I choose to store truth over dying with it. The video ended in static. Frankie exhaled like she'd been underwater. She didn't speak for several seconds. If you submit this, she said, her voice rasping, you're not going after one man or one company. You're going after a machine. The whole damn web. Delaney stepped away from the desk, knelt beside her backpack, and pulled out a small zip folder. She slid the USB drive inside, then placed it beside a fresh printed copy of the statement and a cover sheet. Her hands shook, not with fear, but clarity. I'm not doing it to win, she said quietly. I'm doing it because he didn't get to. Frankie looked up. The hearing's tomorrow, right? Delaney nodded. Take 2 copies. Give them something to choke on. As the printer hummed, Micah sat in the far corner of the room, with his sketch pad silent through it all. His pencil moved in slow, intentional strokes. Frankie glanced over. He's focused. That's good. Delaney walked to him, crouched low beside his chair. What are you drawing? He tilted the pad toward her. A simple outline of the cabin, but this time golden light spilled from every window. Not a single shadow in sight, and in the corner drawn small, but clearly 2 figures standing side by side. One tall, one smaller. She brushed his hair back. He leaned into her touch. Neither said anything. The printer spat out the final page. Frankie slipped it into the file, then passed it to Delaney. You sure you're ready for this? Delaney didn't answer. She just zipped the bag closed and set it by the door. The courthouse felt colder than outside, though the September sun pressed hard against the old stone building. Delaney stood at the metal detector, clutching Micah's school jacket to her chest, the sleeves balled in her fists like something to hold her upright. Courtroom 2B smelled faintly of old carpet and overpolished wood. She stepped inside. Her boots echoed too loudly. Every seat felt like it had eyes. Micah wasn't with her. He was staying with Frankie, who promised to keep him far away from any courthouse drama. But Delaney could almost sense his presence, like the scent of his shampoo still lingered on her sleeve. At the front, her ex-husband sat beside a sharply dressed attorney with a silver tie and smooth, rehearsed posture. He didn't look at her, but she noticed how he adjusted his cufflinks 3 times in 1 minute. 2 rows behind him, sitting just beyond the divider glass, Victor Lawton. He wore a charcoal suit, black sunglasses, despite the indoor lighting, and an expression carved from nothing. No legal team, no entourage. Just a man occupying space as if he owned it. Delaney exhaled slowly. She moved toward her assigned table. Her court-appointed counsel, a younger woman with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, offered a tight smile but said nothing. Everything had already been discussed. This was the moment. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Morellis, an older woman with no patience for theatrics, shuffled her papers and began. We are here to consider temporary custody modifications in the case of Roe versus Roe. Mr. Garrett Roe, you have submitted a petition to assume primary custody of your son, citing unsafe living conditions and a pending federal investigation surrounding Ms. Roe's residence. Is that correct? Garrett stood. Yes, Your Honor. I believe it's in Micah's best interest to be with me at least until all of this is resolved. All of this being his lawyer stood for him. Your Honor, our office has been informed that Ms. Roe is in possession of material linked to an unverified federal project involving prohibited technology. Law enforcement has not confirmed or denied its nature, but there is concern regarding safety, psychological impact on the child, and overall parental judgment. Morels turned to Delaney. Ms. Roe, do you wish to respond? Delaney rose slowly, her pulse thudding in her neck. I do, Your Honor. She reached into her bag, pulled out the small gray USB drive, and handed it to the clerk. I'd like to submit this as part of my statement. What is it? Evidence. Recorded testimony. It should speak for itself. Judge Morellis gestured to the clerk. A tech assistant was brought in. The screen was rolled down, projector blinking to life. The courtroom lights dimmed. And then there he was. Thaddeus Blackwood speaking from the grainy frame. His voice, steady eyes locked onto the lens like he could still see through it straight into the room. If you're seeing this, I've already lost more than I meant to. But what I didn't lose was the truth. His words echoed softly under the fluorescent hum. They wanted the resonance design. When I said no, they said I'd vanish. I did. But I left the work where someone might care enough to finish it, not to build, but to choose who should. Delaney didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew the room was still. The judge didn't blink. Garrett sat frozen. His lawyer leaned slightly forward as if proximity would make it easier to deny what he was hearing. Behind the frosted glass, Victor Lawton's head tilted a fraction, but his face stone. The video ended. Silence followed. Judge Mireless cleared her throat. We will recess proceedings for 48 hours to verify this material. The court takes no chances when federal matters intersect family custody, but we also do not tolerate manipulation. She glanced over the rim of her glasses. Ms. Rowe, you will retain full custody until further notice. Mr. Rowe, your motion is under review. Garrett stood but didn't speak. His lawyer whispered something urgent. The two moved briskly toward the exit shoes, tapping against tile like fleeing mice. Delaney remained still, both hands resting lightly on the table, as if afraid they'd shake if she moved. As the room emptied around her, she finally turned toward the gallery. Victor Lawton was already gone. The article hit the internet on a Thursday morning. Delaney sat on the cabin steps, cradling a mug of black coffee gone cold as Frankie's call came through. No greeting, just her voice clipped and tight. It's up. Check your inbox. The subject line of the email read like a punch. Single mother uncovers lost tech in North Carolina forest. A citizen's fight against the silence, published by Beacon Wire, a small but relentless independent outlet known for chasing government-adjacent stories no one else would touch. Delaney clicked the link. Her own face filled the screen, blurry, taken from a distance, shoulders hunched beneath the cabin porch light. Below the image paragraphs unraveling the story of her discovery, Thaddeus Blackwood, and the alleged suppression of his work. Quotes from the video scanned screenshots of the files. No mention of Micah. Thank God. She'd asked for that explicitly. Still within hours, the ripple began to spread. By noon, Argon Energy released an official statement published on their press site and picked up by local news affiliates. The tone was surgical. Ms. Rowe, while acting independently, has engaged with materials that fall under federal jurisdiction. Her handling of these materials may be considered a breach of procedural boundaries concerning classified technological artifacts. Delaney read it 3 times, each sentence more sterile than the last. Every word pressed down like a lid snapping shut. She stayed quiet through the first few media calls, voicemails from unfamiliar numbers, questions left dangling in messages like bait. Frankie fielded most of them, telling anyone who asked that Delaney had nothing to say without legal counsel. By the weekend, the road to the cabin changed. 2 vehicles parked just outside the gravel path, trucks with no license plates and handmade signs nailed into the trees. Property monitored for public safety. Men in navy jackets and boots patrolled the trailhead, walkie-talkies clipped to their belts. No visible weapons, no official badges, but their presence said enough. Delaney didn't approach. Frankie called again that night. They're not government. I ran facial scans. None of them show up in agency directories. Merc's worst, Frankie said. Volunteers, vigilantes, the kind who don't wait for permission. That same afternoon, Micah came home from school with a folded note in his backpack. Delaney opened it on the porch, her hands trembling. The handwriting was neat, parental. We're asking the administration to assess the environment your son is exposed to. Other parents are concerned. She read the line twice, then again. It was polite in tone, but the intent was sharp. They were isolating him now, one paper cut at a time. Micah said nothing when she asked how his day had gone. He just asked if he could go stay at Frankie's for a while. Delaney said yes. She packed his things in silence, 2 t-shirts, his favorite sweater, the sketch pad with the newest drawing left half finished, a small flashlight, his rubber band collection, toothbrush wrapped in a napkin. He hugged her tightly, longer than usual, his chin pressed into her shoulder like he was anchoring himself. Frankie picked him up at dusk. Her car disappeared into the tree line. The headlights vanished. Then it was just the wind again. By midnight, the cabin walls creaked like old lungs. Delaney wandered from room to room, the floor beneath her feet cold and unforgiving. She didn't turn on any lights. There weren't many left working. The windows felt thinner now, like the glass wasn't meant to keep anything out. Shadows shifted on the walls, thrown by the occasional passing cloud over the moon. Outside, something scraped across the gravel, an animal maybe. She didn't check. She lit a single candle, then walked to the far wall of the main room, the one that faced east. With a piece of chalk pulled from Micah's old pencil box, she pressed the tip to the wood. Her handwriting was small, deliberate, careful, like carving a truth she couldn't afford to forget. If no one believes me, at least I must not lie to myself. The chalk snapped. She dropped it to the floor. She sank slowly, knees folding, until she was seated on the bare floor. Back to the wall. Elbows on knees. The candle flickered beside her, casting thin golden arcs along the floorboards. Her eyes stayed open, but unfocused. Outside, the wind picked up again. The trucks were still parked down the hill. The men might still be awake, watching through scopes, recording heat signatures. Inside, the candle guttered the wax, pooling unevenly as her eyes stayed open, tracing the lines of shadow across the wall until morning came. The gavel struck once, sharp enough to snap her upright in the chair. Delaney's fingers rested on the table, barely grazing the surface nails bitten short. Across from her, a federal patent official adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was mild but absolute. "We have reviewed the submission received via court order," he said, nodding toward the flash drive. "Our records confirm that the included documentation, signed technical drawings, inventor's log, and recorded testimony was never archived officially, nor entered into any pending review. The content predates our current security protocols. No rustle in the room, only the hum of the overhead lights." He looked toward the bench. The material appears authentic. Chain of custody begins with Ms. Rowe. The judge, a narrow man with a hawk's posture, tapped his pen once. Given this testimony and the preliminary findings, the court moves to recommend an independent investigation into prior suppression of intellectual property concerning Thaddeus Blackwood's research. As this matter now extends beyond family court jurisdiction, I will formally refer it to the District Ethics Board. Delaney heard none of it after that. Or rather, she did, but only as sound washing through far off, like listening underwater. Then a new voice, less official, broke through. "My name is David Henley," it said, shaky, crackling, from a laptop on the side table. "I served as an executive assistant to Mr. Victor Lawton from 1989 to 1993. This message is in response to recent developments concerning Blackwood Cabin." Gasps swept through the room like leaves tossed into sudden wind. The video showed a thin man in his 60s, gray at the temples, filmed against a bookshelf backdrop. No production, just confession. "I was asked to dispose of several boxes in 1991. They contained research logs and legal correspondences tied to a project Victor referred to only as the contingency file. I kept one folder. I was scared, but I kept it." He paused. "People should know what we threw away." Delaney turned to look behind her. Victor Lawton sat frozen in the gallery, hands clasped so tightly they had gone pale. His sunglasses were gone now, eyes naked, darting not at the screen but toward the exit. The attorney next to him muttered into his ear, but Victor didn't respond. The judge lifted a brow and murmured something to the bailiff. No cuffs. Not yet. But the fall had begun. An hour later, it was official. The courthouse released a joint statement. Victor Lawton was to be removed from his position as CEO of Argon Energy pending federal investigation. A financial freeze on Argon's accounts would be initiated by close of day. When the judge returned his attention to the original custody dispute, his tone shifted. "There is no sufficient cause to question the living conditions of Micah Rowe," he declared, "and no standing legal basis to alter current guardianship." He stamped the ruling with one heavy motion. The ink hadn't even dried before Delaney felt the breath leave her chest. She stepped outside into brittle autumn light. A few reporters waited on the sidewalk, cameras poised, but no one called out. Maybe they'd seen enough. Frankie joined her by the courthouse steps, hands deep in her coat pockets. "You won," she said softly. Delaney didn't answer. She looked up instead at the overcast sky and the faint outline of sun behind it. No blaze, no celebration. Just warmth through cloud, like it had fought its way down just to touch her shoulders for a second. Micah ran to her from the parking lot, backpack thudding against his side, his arms wrapped around her middle. "Can we go home?" he asked. She nodded. Back at the cabin, the vigilantes were gone. No more unmarked trucks, no more signs nailed into trees. Only the sound of wind slipping between pine needles and the faint groan of the porch settling back into place. Inside, the chalk writing was still on the wall. She didn't wipe it away. That night, Micah pulled a blanket onto the floor beside her chair. He didn't ask why she sat up with the lights off. He just leaned into her side and rested there as if nothing had changed. And in some ways, nothing had. The cabin still creaked. The cold still pressed through the seams. The dark still asked questions. Delaney leaned her head back against the chair, eyes half closed, until the sound of metal striking outside jolted her awake. The mailbox clanged shut, the echo still ringing in her ears, as Delaney slid the envelope into the crook of her arm, nudging the screen door open with her elbow. Afternoon light filtered through the trees, mottling the floor with dappled gold. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of coffee and pine dust. No more mildew, no rot clinging to the corners. Just clean wood and something faintly citrus. Frankie's cleaning obsession had left its mark. The envelope was thick cream-colored, her name printed in small, elegant letters across the front. From the seal, she already knew who sent it. She laid it on the table untouched. Micah's sneakers thudded across the porch. A second later, the screen door bounced open and he tumbled inside with a handful of wildflowers and a piece of folded paper. He handed her the drawing without a word. 3 figures stood in front of a square little cabin, her Micah and someone else. Not Frankie, not Andrew. Just a third figure smiling, like the rest loosely drawn, but unmistakably meant to be Thaddeus Blackwood. Delaney didn't ask. She smoothed the paper, then pinned it beside the wood stove. The old bulletin board held sketches, notices, from town, a fading photograph of Micah at 3 wearing a cardboard crown. The cabin wasn't perfect. The roof still leaked during heavy rain. The back step creaked. But the heater worked now, and the windows shut properly, and most nights the quiet felt like peace, not warning. She hadn't sold the story, hadn't signed the offers, no book deal, no interviews, no lawsuit. What needed to be said had already been recorded, and the rest, what was hers, didn't need to be explained. In town, they'd started calling her the girl in the woods, half affectionate, half uncomfortable. Some came by with wires or batteries to donate. Others avoided eye contact at the post office. Still, the workshop Frankie helped organize had grown. They called it the Loop Room, a nod to closed circuits and second chances. A loose collective of tech repairs, small solar builds, water catch systems. Nothing revolutionary, just functional, handmade, and quietly subversive. Twice a month they held sessions in a borrowed barn. People came with broken radios, failed chargers, cracked circuit boards. Delaney listened more than she spoke, but when she did talk, it came out steady, like her voice had learned to trust itself again. One of the volunteers had once worked under Argonne Energy's rural compliance team. He said nothing about it aloud, but stayed late after every meeting, always the last to turn off the lights. In the evenings, Delaney read aloud to Micah from books she'd never touched before. Stories with slow-building moments, with strange but tender people, with truths that weren't always spoken. He fell asleep easily now, curled beside his drawings, the flashlight forgotten on the floor. On Thursdays, Frankie brought tea and cinnamon muffins, always forgetting the napkins, always leaving her boots by the wrong door. And the envelope from the university stayed unopened on the kitchen table for 3 days. It wasn't rejection she felt. It wasn't fear. It was something else, an ache maybe, for all the things she didn't need to chase anymore. She could have said yes, could have accepted the title Community Consultant for Sustainable Innovation, could have worn it like armor. Instead, that afternoon, she lifted the envelope gently and walked outside. The sky was soft, with the kind of blue that hums under your skin. Not bright, not dramatic, just full. Behind the cabin, wind moved through the trees like a hush pulling at the edges of everything. She passed the old garden bed Micah had helped her clear last month. Herbs would go in come spring, maybe even tomatoes. Beyond that, the swing creaked in the light breeze. Delaney sat down, the wood groaning beneath her. She cradled the envelope in her lap and looked ahead. No one waited for her. No one chased her. The forest was exactly what it had been when she first arrived, unconcerned with her presence, but not unwelcoming. Somewhere deep inside, she recognized the quiet for what it was, not silence, but recovery. The kind of light that doesn't need a name. Some truths aren't meant to be broadcast, they're meant to be held protected and quietly lived. Delaney never wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted a place safe enough for her son to dream again. In a world that tried to erase her voice, she didn't scream. She stayed, and sometimes staying is the loudest act of resistance. If this story moved, you don't forget to follow the channel. There's more waiting stories of strength, shadows, and the light we carry through both.